Hello, my abnormal family. This is one of the videos I told you that I was going to drop this week. It's going to focus on Teddy Roosevelt, Bigfoot, and our national forests. Now, at the end of this, I will give you some of the theories that's out there. If you want to support the Bring Hunter Home, there is links in the description. This was told by Teddy Roosevelt. This is actually quoted, so let's get into it. Frontiersmen are not, as a rule, apt to be superstitious. They lead lives too hard and practical, and have too little imagination in things spiritual and supernatural. I have heard but few ghost stories while living on the frontier, and those few were on perfectly commonplace and conventional type. But I once listened to a goblin story which rather impressed me. A grizzled, weather-beaten old mountain hunter by the name of Bowman, who was born who had passed all his life on the frontier. He must have believed what he said, for he could hardly repress a shudder at a certain point of the tale. But he was of German ancestry, and in childhood had doubtless been saturated with all kinds of ghost and goblin lore, so that many fearsome superstitions were latent in his mind. Besides, he knew well the stories told by the Indian medicine men in their winter camps, of the snow walkers and the specters, and the formless evil beings that haunt the forest depths, and the dog that waylay the lonely wanderer who after nightfall passes through the regions where they lurk. It may be that when overcome by the horror of fate that befell his friend, and when oppressed by the awful dread of the unknown, he grew to attribute both time and still more in remembrance weird elfin traits to what was merely some wicked and cunning wild beasts. But whether this was so or not, this man was literally terrified in his story. When the event occurred, Bowman was still a young man and was trapping with a partner among the mountains, dividing the forks of the salmon from the head of the Wisdom River. Having had not much luck, he and his partner determined to go up into the particularly wild and lonely pass through which ran a small stream said to contain many beavers. The pass had an evil reputation, because the year before a solitary hunter who had wandered in it was slain, seemingly by a wild beast, the half-eaten remains being afterwards found by some mining prospectors who had passed his camp only the night before. The memory of this event, however, weighed very lightly with the two trappers, who were adventurous and hardy as others of their kind. They took their two lean mountain ponies to the foot of the pass, where they left them in the open beaver meadow, the rocky timber-clad ground being from there onward impracticable for horses. They then struck out on foot through the vast gloomy forest, and in about an hour reached the little open glade where they concluded to camp, as signs of game were plenty. There was still an hour or two of daylight left, and after building a brush lean to the throwing down of the opening their packs, they started upstream. The country was so very dense and hard to travel through, as there was much down timber, although here and there the somber woodland was broken by small glades of mountain grass. At dusk they again reached camp. They were very glad, in which it was pitched, was not many yards wide, and the tall close-set pines of the first rising round it like a wall. On one side was a little stream, beyond which rose the steep mountain slope, covered with the unbroken growth of the evergreen forest. They were surprised to find that during their absence something, apparently a bear, had visited the camp, and had rummaged through among their things, scattering the contents of their packs, and in a sheer wantonness destroying their lean-to. The footprints of the beast were quite plain, but at first they paid no particular heed to them, busying themselves with the rebuilding the lean-to, laying out their beds, and stores and lighting the fire. While Bowman was making ready supper, it being already dark, his companion began to examine the tracks more closely, and soon took a brand from the fire to follow them up, where the intruder had walked along the game trail after leaving the camp. When the brand flickered out, he returned and took another repeating of his inspection of the footprints very closely. Coming back to the fire, he stood by a minute or two, peering into the darkness, and suddenly remarked, "Bowman, that bear has been walking on 2 legs." Bowman laughed at this, but his partner insisted that he was right. And upon again examining the tracks with a torch, they certainly did seem to be made by but 2 paws or feet. However, it was too dark to make sure. After discussing whether the footprints could possibly be those of a human being and coming to a conclusion that they could not be, the 2 men rolled up their blankets and went to sleep under the lean-to. At midnight, Bowman was awakened by some noise, and sat up in his blankets. As he did, his nostrils were struck by a strong, wild beast odor, and he caught the loom of a great body in the darkness at the mouth of the lean-to. Grasping his rifle, he fired at the vague, threatening shadow, but must have missed, for immediately afterwards he heard the smashing of the underwood as something was running away. Whatever it was rushed off into the impenetrable darkness of the forest and of the night. After this the men slept but little, sitting up by the rekindled fire, but they heard nothing more. In the morning they started out to look for the few traps they had set out previous evening and put out new ones. By an unspoken agreement they kept together all day and returned to camp toward evening. On nearing it, they saw heartily, to their astonishment, that the lean had been torn down again. The visitor of the preceding day had returned, and in a wanton malice their camp was tossed about, their camp kit and bedding, and destroyed the shanty. The ground was marked up by tracks, and on leaving the camp it had gone along the soft earth by the brook. The footprints were as plain as if snow, and careful scrutiny of the trail. It certainly did seem as if whatever these things was, it had walked off on 2 legs. The men, thoroughly uneasy, gathered a great heap of dead logs, and to keep up the roaring fire without the night, one of the other sitting on guard, most of them, all the time. About midnight, the thing came down through the forest, opposite across the brook, and stayed there on the hillside for nearly an hour. They could hear the branches crackle as it moved about, and several times it uttered a harsh, grating, long-drawn moan, a peculiar sinister sound, yet it did not venture near the fire. In the morning, the 2 trappers, after discussing the strange events of the last 36 hours, decided that they should shoulder their packs and leave the valley that afternoon. They were more ready to do this because, in spite of seeing good game sign, they had caught very little fur. However, it was necessary for us to go along the line of their traps and gather them, and this they started out to do. All the morning they kept together, picking up the trap after trap, each one empty. On first leaving camp, they had the disagreeable sensation of being followed. In the dense spruce thickets, they occasionally heard a branch snap after they had passed, and now and then there were slight rustling noises among the small pines to one side of them. At noon they were back with a couple of miles of camp, and at high bright sunlight their fears seemed absurd to the 2 armed men. Accustomed as they were, though long years of lonely wandering in the wilderness, to face every other danger from man, brute, or element, there were still 3 beaver traps to collect from a little pond in a wide ravine nearby. Bowman volunteered to gather these and to bring them in, while his companion went ahead to camp and made ready the packs. On reaching the pond, Bowman found the 3 beavers in the traps, one which had been pulled loose and carried into the river house. He took several hours securing and preparing the beaver, and when he started homewards he marked with some uneasiness how the sun was getting. as he hurried toward camp under the tall trees. The silence and desolation of the forest weighed upon him. His feet made no sound on the pine needles, and the slanted sunrays streaking through among the straight trunks made a gray twilight in which objects at a distance glimmered indecisively. There was nothing to break the gloomy stillness, which when there is no breeze always broods over these somber primal forests. At last he came to the edge of the little glade where the camp lay, and shouted as he approached it, but got no answer. The campfire had gone out, though thin blue smoke was still curling upwards. Near it lay the packs wrapped and arranged. At first Bowman could see nobody, nor did he receive an answer to his call. Stepping forward, he again shouted, and as he did so his eyes fell upon the body of his friend stretched beside the trunk of a great fallen spruce. Rushing toward him in a horrified manner, the trapper found that body was still warm, but the neck was broken, while there were 4 great fang marks at the throat. The footprints of an unknown beast creature printed deep in the soft soil. Well, it told the whole story. The unfortunate man, having finished his packing, had sat down on the spruce log with his face to the fire and his back to the dense woods, to wait for his companion. While thus waiting, this monstrous assailant, which must have been lurking in the woods, waiting for a chance to catch one of the adventurers unprepared, came silently up from behind, walking with the long, noiseless steps, and seemingly still on 2 legs. Evidently unheard, it reached the man, and broke his neck by wrenching his head back with its forepaws, while it buried its teeth into his throat. It had not eaten the body, but apparently had romped and gamboled around, and an uncouth, ferocious gleeble. It had fled back to the soundless depths of the woods. Bowman, utterly unnerved and believing the creature with which he had to deal was something either half human or half devil, some great goblin beast, abandoned everything but his rifle and stuck off in speed down the pass, not halting until he reached the beaver's meadows, where he hobbled the ponies. Still gazing, mounting, he rode onwards through the night until beyond reach of pursuit. Roosevelt was obviously so impressed by the validity of this tale to share it along with his own reflection of life in the wilderness. Apparently believing the man as tough and stoic of a character, Bowman rendered able to hardly repress a shudder, while reliving the distant memory is proof enough. Guys, a lot of people believe Teddy Roosevelt was Bowman in this story, and that the other guy was Bowman's friend, which leads a lot of people to believe that Teddy Roosevelt, I believe it was in 1902, created the first national forests. Some people wonder, did he create the national forests for us, or did he create the national forests for them? Was it his encounter with this beast what caused him to build these national forests to give these beasts somewhere to live? Was it the encounter that he had with this beast what made him believe this story and believe it to be so formidable? I believe he was Bowman. What do you guys believe? Guys, this is looking into our national forests this week. I hope you enjoyed this. Teddy Roosevelt wrote this himself. It was his own words. What do you believe? Do you believe Teddy Roosevelt had an encounter that caused him to build the forests? And if he did, were they built for us or for them? Thank you for watching, guys. And until next time, keep your head on a swivel and don't be something's dinner.